You're saying it's the Democrats' fault that he's in. I'm saying, well, it's partly the fault of the people like you who are polishing his turds during the campaign and making him seem better than he is.
I didn't polish his turds in the campaign. Go back and read what I said. I just felt he would be different second time round.
What is up, everybody? Jackson here, and this one's a genuinely good back and forth, which doesn't happen often anymore. Tim Miller from The Bulwark sat down with Piers Morgan to hash out this whole Trump derangement syndrome framing, and instead of just yelling past each other, they actually got into something real. Is cable news manufacturing a false balance between life and death issues and manufactured culture war stories? Miller pushes Piers hard on why a segment about ICE incidents gets balanced with a segment about trans athletes in a way that doesn't reflect how much either issue actually matters to people. And then it gets even more interesting when Piers has to answer for calling Trump a changed man before the election and admitting on camera that he was wrong. I want to break down where each of them actually scored points and where they didn't. So stick with me to the end. Get that like in. Get subscribed. Because this is the kind of debate breakdown we do here. Now let's get into it.
Sometimes monitoring your show, my critique is, particularly during this Trump era, I think it was a little bit different when Biden was in because there's plenty of legitimate things to criticize Biden about. But during the Trump era, I'll come on and it'll be like, well, the ICE killed 2 people in the streets. That's segment 1. And then it's like segment 2, we have to find balance. So like, let's talk about, some crazy liberal school district in San Francisco where they, tried to take Abraham Lincoln's name off the school or something. And
why can't you do it? But how interesting that you would cite that as an example of something that's wrong. Whereas I would say, Tim, and I love you dearly, and you're great when you come on my show, and I love what you do here. But right there's the problem. You would only want that show to be all about Trump bashing, and that's fine. That's what you do.
Though. I'm just saying you're crazy.
But the other story can be just as interesting to a large constituent of my viewers. Why would I be so? I mean, should I park myself into the bulwark camp? Should I become a little mini Tim Miller?
Obviously, it's interesting because you're feeding them sucker, to use your words. You're giving them something that's like, hey, you're right. The liberals are crazy. Let's talk about this random person.
Spoiler alert. A lot of liberals are crazy.
Well, sure. But a lot of conservatives are crazy.
Yes.
A lot of people are crazy. Humans are crazy.
Yes.
I'm talking about trying to make a judgment call on like what is important and what is not. And I feel like a lot of times like this idea that these woke excesses, there's some movie, The Odyssey has a black person in it. Like a lot of this stuff is stupid in the grand scheme of things compared to like life or death.
Yeah, but I do think, if you don't mind me saying, again, say this respectfully, there's a little bit of pomposity to that statement. In other words, you have decided you know better than me what you think is important. And I would say that is not necessarily true. A lot of the woke issues actually are things of legitimate mass concern. I'll give you an example. The ongoing furore around trans athletes in women's sport, for example.
I knew you were going to say this.
Well, because
it as important? Like, how many segments have you had on the show about trans people in women's sports versus how important that is to people in society? I just think that there's like but this is out of whack. It's out of balance. I'm not saying don't talk about it, but it's also like, who cares?
Yeah, but this is the classic error that my liberal friends make. And by the way, I'm a recovering liberal, so I sit in the kind of Bill Maher place.
I'm a liberal immigrant, so we're going crossways.
But I would say that if you actually go out on the street and asked 1,000 people what they think about that, A, they would care, and B, they think it's complete nonsense. And what my liberal friends do, the terrible mistake you make, I'm afraid, when you try to say nobody cares, is you're missing the fact that they do care. And, it was people like Joe Biden, when he hitched his mast to saying that it was fine for trans women to compete in women's sport, actually Americans went, this is nonsense, which is why he lost.
My point is not that nobody cares. My point is that, like, in the grand scheme of things, you're covering a news show, having so many segments about, like, the 5th place performer in a women's high school swim match. It's like,
who are you to tell me what my running order should be? What? I mean, why should you dictate?
I'm not telling you what your running order should be. I'm just saying it speaks to the idea that I think that it's creating a fake balance. It's like, okay, on the one hand, Trump got us into a stupid war.
No.
On the other hand, oh my goodness, there was a lacrosse match that had a girl in it in West Virginia.
I used to be at CNN for 4 years. I was on Good Morning Britain for 5 years, and I can tell you it's exactly the same at those places, right? CNN has a mix of light and shade, serious and silly. Good Morning Britain more so because it was a morning show. The idea that you should only feed people with a diet of what you have deemed is serious and important is one of the reasons mainstream media in particular have been collapsing in popularity, because most people out there don't spend all day obsessing.
We agree on this. You're kind of walking past my criticism. You're walking past my criticism because we agree on this. Be silly. It's fine.
Yeah.
The thing is an excessive focus on random crazy liberal shit. There's plenty of random crazy, because I live in Louisiana. Let me tell you, there's plenty of crazy random conservative shit happening in middle schools. But anyway, this is my show.
So I can tell you,
we should talk about Trump.
Of course, but I can tell you, I've done a lot more, for example, a lot more on the Iran war than anything woke related in the last 3-4 months. And I've been incredibly critical of Trump from the start of it. So, I know we'll come to Trump and about balance and so on, but no, very few people have been out there as critical as I have been about Trump, who perhaps people presume would normally slightly slant my way towards him because I know it.
I totally agree. For the same, and I had Sager and Genty on the show maybe about a month ago, and I said the same thing to him. And it's one thing that's hard for me to do is I don't have Trump bullshitters on my show. And so I'm looking for people who are sympathetic to Trump, but are also honest about him and critiquing about him. And I appreciate that about your show. To that point, let's go back to some Trump thoughts that you've had. But around Thanksgiving, after he was elected, you wrote in the New York Post that he called you and you think he's ready to be one of America's great presidents. You said that you've been struck by the realization that he's a changed man.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how that's looking now.
Not great. Because he, unfortunately, has reverted to type. But more worryingly, I think, for his legacy, he has begun to do things which he specifically campaigned on the opposite. Not going into war in the Middle East, for example. Focusing on America first and getting inflation down and so on. Well, why would you launch a global trade war? And why would you go to war with Iran if actually those campaign aims were your priority? It's the opposite. It's going to have the opposite effect, as we've seen. So I think it's unfortunate. I did think that Trump Mark II, particularly after he survived several assassination attempts, I felt talking to him, he was a bit of a changed character. But, there's also the reality check. He's just turned 80. There aren't many people who turn 80 who suddenly become different people. I do think that he has, he's had, I'm sure we'll talk about this. He's had some things which have been great successes, and he's had other things that have been big failures. He's still not even quite halfway. Well, how long's he got till the next election? Like 2.5 years. So he's still, he's not even halfway through his second term. He's got time to pivot and change course. The concern I would have if I was advising Trump is that I think it's looking more likely than not he might lose control of the House and the Senate in the midterms. And if that happens, he'll become a lame duck, which will be for him about as bad as life gets. But my argument to the new incoming Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, the new Labour Prime Minister who will take his position in a couple of weeks, is if you were to have another referendum, there's nothing stopping you. I reckon you would have a 70% landslide vote by the British people to go back into the European Union.
But why can't you see the same clarity with our failed experiment?
Because even if because I'm not American, so it's your business, not mine. Secondly, if I did think that, it makes zero difference to the fact Trump will remain president as long as he stays alive in the next 2.5 years. So you can't, but the referendum, if you had a referendum aspect to your presidential system, fine. You don't. You elect a president for 4 years, and I think presidents should be judged at the end of 4 years.
Here's my issue though. You said that, you voted for some conservative president or some prime ministers for some liberal in the UK. I used to be a conservative. Part of what attracted me to conservatism was this like kind of small C conservative notion that came from you guys. It was Burkean. This notion that like you don't know exactly when you make a big change, you don't know what the unintended consequences should be. You should make gradual change. You should be prudent. That is in the spirit of Thatcher and the spirit of Blair. What happened with Brexit and Trump wasn't conservative. Like it was arsony. It was an arson. It was like, we're going to blow up this system and try to build a new system in our image. And like, it's just obviously not working in either case.
But I would say in relation to Thatcher and Blair, they both had moments where they blew up too. I mean, Thatcher notoriously over the poll tax, which was one of the most divisive and hated taxation systems that ever came into the country.
That's incremental change.
Hang on. And then Tony Blair illegally invaded Iraq, which was his legacy and was one of the biggest foreign policy disasters of my lifetime. And I opposed that very loudly as editor of the Daily Mirror at the time. So, even the people I voted for had moments where they blew up. Leaders blow up. They do dumb things, right? The question becomes
that's all Trump is blow up, blow up, blow up, blow up.
Yeah,
it's not incremental change. It's tear things down. It's Doge. We're going to end USAID. Yeah. It's all impulsive. It's not conservative. It's not a way to run.
It's not conservative. I agree with you. I agree. It's not conservative. And a lot of the things that you don't like about stuff he's done, I would agree with. I just think that to avoid the charge of TDS, you have to find it in your soul to find some things he's done which are correct.
No, some things are just rotten though. some things are just rotten. Like the project is rotten. So it's kind of like, even if, like there is something like an element of the project that had a good outcome, it's part of a rotten project.
But I blame the left entirely, because if you believe that Trump has been a dismal failure and he's a rotten apple and all the rest of it, well, fine. You had an opportunity to force out your president, Biden, before it was too late, when he was obviously completely gaga. No one on the left wanted to say what was happening in front of their eyes. And then you left it so late that Kamala Harris got coronated, was clearly totally unsuited to take on Trump, and got the beating that I think she and the party deserved. And my question for you guys now is, it still remains the big theme on the left is Trump bashing and reacting to every single thing he does, most of which, by the way, he does deliberately to wind you all up. I've been there when he's done it. So what you need,
unfortunately, he's the president.
You need to find a new Clinton, a new Obama, a new Bill Clinton, a new Obama, somebody center left who can galvanize a genuine constituent of Americans to say, I prefer that way to what I have with Trump.
Piers, okay, fine, I agree, but it's offering a clear-eyed critique of the Democrats that I agreed with, while polishing Trump's turds.
No, I'm not polishing Trump's turds.
Part of the problem that Trump. I'm sorry. Yes, you did. Yes, you were. You said that he was a changed man, that he could be one of America's great presidents. He obviously was not going to be one of America's great presidents.
You asked me whether that still stood. I said no.
But I did before the election. You're saying it's the Democrats' fault that he's in. I'm saying, well, it's partly the fault of the people like you who are polishing his turds during the campaign and making him seem better than he is.
I didn't polish his turds in the campaign. Go back and read what I said. I just felt he would be different second time round. And unfortunately, to date, I don't think he has been. He's played to his worst sensibilities rather than his best. Now, he still has to.
So I'm right again, though. So I have TDS, but I keep being right about him.
You might be.
How does that work? How do I have derangement syndrome but also keep seeing him more clearly than you?
You might be, but your failure to accept he does anything right is a terrible indication of
what
your
was your
chronic
second
TDS.
one? Did you have a second thing that he's done right besides the border?
I would say that his... You can let me finish? I would say the way he got the remaining hostages out of Gaza for Israel was a major achievement.
You think Gaza and the Israel relationship's going well?
No,
you think that's doing great?
I think that part of it's going terribly. But if you ask me, was it good that the President of the United States managed to get those hostages out? I'd say yes. Sure. And you should give him credit for that. And if you can't give him credit for that, you have TDS.
Well, sure. It's good that the hostages are out, but that doesn't mean his Israel policy is good. Again, you can have good outcomes underneath bad policies. That's the whole point, underneath, a corrupt system.
Yeah, look, I think that Trump deserves credit for getting the hostages out, but I think that the decision to go into war in Iran with Israel, after Trump was persuaded by Benjamin Netanyahu it would be a good idea, has turned out to be a terrible decision. I said that at the start. I believe it today. I think it's got real potential, unfortunately, for Trump to become his legacy. And I wish he'd never done it.
And across the Middle East, he just has these corrupt relationships. We don't know if it's financial with Bibi. Obviously, Bibi was influencing him, but we have Qatar's plane now. His son-in-law's in business with the Saudis. How can you prosecute a war judiciously when you're getting paid off by everybody in the region?
Well, I think the United States has to do business with countries, states in the Middle East.
The Trump family doesn't, though. The Trump family doesn't have to do business.
Well, let's wait and see whether what they're doing is corrupt or not. There will obviously be investigations into this, as they were into the Biden family, who seem to be up to their neck.
This is nothing like the Biden family.
Well, you don't think it is. Of course you don't.
I know this. The scaling, the UAE crypto deal is like $500 billion. Yeah,
but you said it was. Hang on, Tim.
Was Hunter negotiating for the country like Jared Kushner is?
You said it was corrupt. Let's wait and see if anyone ever establishes it was actual corruption.
What more needs to be established? Jared Kushner is not a member of our government. He's negotiating as part of this Iran war while taking money from the Saudi government. That's all established.
Well, I would like to see these things properly investigated, which I'm sure they will be, particularly if Trump loses the midterms. Then you're going to see all sorts of stuff going on in terms of legal actions and possible impeachments and so on. We know that. But I would also stress to you, how much time did you devote? Maybe you did and I missed it. Did you devote a lot of time to going after the Biden family for the obvious corruption of Hunter Biden having a job at an energy company in Ukraine without any experience? Or did you just conveniently overlook that, Tim?
You don't have a gotcha with me on that one, Piers. You can get me on some things, but the Burisma thing I think was bullshit. But Hunter kind of hates me now, and on every podcast he goes on, he brings it up. I'm in his head for some reason. Anyway, I've taken too much of your time. Hopefully we...
All right, let's actually dig into what was a pretty substantive exchange, because both of these guys made points worth sitting with. Tim Miller's core argument was about proportionality, not censorship. His point wasn't don't ever cover trans athletes in sports. It was that When a show gives roughly equal airtime to, say, a fatal ice incident and a lacrosse team controversy, that's not neutral. That's a choice about what to make people afraid of. And he backed it with something concrete. When the NCAA's president testified to Congress, he reportedly said something like fewer than 10 out of roughly 300,000 college athletes were trans. If that figure holds up, it's a legitimately useful data point for arguing that the airtime given to this topic is wildly out of proportion to its actual scale, regardless of where you land on the underlying policy. Question: Piers Morgan's pushback was that Miller was essentially asking him to only cover what Miller personally considers important, and that a show serving a broad audience has to include lighter or more culturally resonant stories alongside the heavy ones. Otherwise, you just become an echo chamber for one side's priorities. That's a real point too. The disagreement here isn't really about facts. It's about editorial judgment, and reasonable people can land in different places on how a broadcast should balance urgency against audience interest. Where this got genuinely interesting is when Miller pressed Piers on his own record. The fact that Piers wrote around Thanksgiving after the election that Trump seemed like a changed man ready to be one of America's great presidents. To Piers's credit, he didn't dodge it. He said flatly that he was wrong, that Trump reverted to type, and he even gave Miller credit for calling it correctly at the time. That's a level of accountability you don't see often in this format, and it's worth acknowledging regardless of which side you're on. The most contested part of the whole exchange, though, is the corruption discussion near the end. The claims about Jared Kushner's business dealings with Saudi Arabia while involved in Middle East diplomacy, and the comparison to allegations against Hunter Biden. I want to be careful here. Both of those are allegations, not established legal findings. And Piers himself said as much, that these things need to be properly investigated before anyone calls them corruption. That's the right instinct. Regardless of who the allegation is about, it's fair to raise the appearance of conflict of interest as worth scrutinizing. It's a different thing to declare it proven, and neither guy in this clip actually crossed that line. To be fair to both of them, where I think Miller's overall argument holds up best is the core claim underneath everything else, that Trump's approach isn't small government conservatism in the traditional sense. It's disruption for its own sake, dismantling agencies and institutions rapidly rather than incrementally. Whether you think that's good or bad depends on your priors, but as a description of the governing style, it's hard to argue with, and even Piers agreed with that specific characterization on camera. So here's what I want to know. Do you think cable news actually manufactures false balance the way Miller describes? Or is Piers right that a broad audience needs both the heavy stories and the lighter ones? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more of these head-to-head breakdowns, get subscribed! Because that's what this channel is here for.